All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mads channel. It's Maddie here, and welcome back to Meta Monday, the weekly series where we analyze the Pokemon Pocket metagame and keep you guys up to date on everything going on in the competitive world of Pokemon Pocket. This past weekend was PMPT number 31. I think almost 500 or so people came out to play this weekend. Absolutely incredible, considering this was the first sort of week where the ranked battle season also started up, but very interesting results. So what we always do in Meta Mondays, we break down the results of the tournament. We highlight all of the players, all of the deck lists, and then we kind of break down the metagame data. That's what we're going to do in today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to navigate throughout the video using the timestamps down below if you want to do that. This might be, the Meta Monday videos can be a bit long sometimes, for sure. Before we get into it, don't forget to register for PMPT number 32. That's right. The 32nd tournament is this upcoming weekend. This should be the last tournament of this new season. It's crazy how quickly things went by. But after this weekend, and I think sometime this week, potentially, we should be getting an announcement of the next set that's going to be releasing, which will be a mini set. And then it'll be, by the end of the month, it'll be released. So I don't know if actually there's going to be a PMPT number 33 without or before, or after this new set coming out. But anyway, this should be the last one, at least of this ranked season that's out currently. Anyway, let's get right into it, guys. Here are the final standings of the tournament this past weekend. Here they are. That's right. SR from Indonesia playing Bad Dreams, Sleep Scam, Altaria. Had a really great run this weekend. You'll notice that Igglybuff Darkrai was present in 4 of the top 8 decks this weekend. So, the Bad Dreams, Sleep Scam stuff actually popped off significantly this weekend. And I do think there's a bit of a bounce back effect of, rubber band effect going on. Sceptile ended up winning the last couple of weekends. And I think there was a ton of counterplay to Sleep early this season. And it really didn't do that well, at least at PMPD tournaments over the last few weeks. So I think that, now people sort of forgotten how they forgot a little bit this weekend about Sleep and the Sleep Scam decks. They sort of, I guess, disrespected. It was being disrespected, and now kind of came in full force and did extremely well this weekend. And if you guys watched the stream this weekend, you probably weren't super entertained by the grand finals and kind of how some of the matches go. But that's how Sleep Scam operates. It is a very non-engaging, I guess, mechanic in Pokemon Pocket, right? If you get put to sleep and you don't really have a way to answer it, you just sort of, potentially you can just do nothing for the entire game. So we saw some stuff like that happen in Top Cut, especially there, I think, in the grand finals. In second place, we had Sergio, 91 from Canada, 11-3. This is Suicune Baxcalibur. We talked about Suicune on Friday last week that, Suicune really kind of suffered a lot early this season as well. It just wasn't really something that was that popular or, was doing extremely well for a variety of circumstances when it came to this new metagame, but, having a pretty decent run, at least this player making it all the way to grand finals, right? So Altaria, Suicune kind of rising back up. And like I said, a bit of a kind of a bounce back type of mechanic happening here into the third week of this new season. I think we're kind of, we're going to come around full circle for sure is what's going to happen. I do also want to note, some people might comment, we had a match in top 8 that ended up, I think, tying in game 3. And then due to the circumstances of our rule book and some of the stuff we have in place, that match ended up being decided by a coin flip, which I think a lot of people thought was pretty anticlimactic, which I kind of agree. Just to talk on that a little bit, we have that rule in place because there are certain decks, especially in Swiss rounds when we have hundreds of games going on, there are certain interactions in Pokemon Pocket where games will just literally never conclude. Think about things like, Steelix and Indeedee and Heavy Helmet type decks with Oricorio in those matchups, right? There's certain interactions between different decks in this game that literally will never come down to a conclusive winner. And specifically in Swiss rounds, when we have all of these games and we're trying to move the tournament along, that's why we have the coin flip rule, just to kind of determine a winner, to some degree if the players don't want to intentionally tie. So that's why that rule exists. Now, this scenario was different. They just ended up tying in game 3, and then, this was Top Cut. So realistically, they probably should have continued to play. There was, of course, some miscommunication between, the casters and the judge teams and whatnot. So we got together, we talked about it, and we shouldn't necessarily have that issue moving forward. But I know some people definitely weren't super happy with how that, how that got figured out in Top Cut. But things like that happen in tournaments, right? But we definitely talked about it, and we're gonna, try to fix that process moving forward. But like I said, that rule exists for like the certain scenarios where like you could go to a game 4, game 5, game 6, and it would still just always end in a tie because certain decks just can never, end up, like in a finishing board state. So, but anyway, I just wanted to touch on that. Anyway, let's get into the third place. We actually have multiple Frog EX participants from France. Frog EX Fab, 11-1-1 record playing Dark Greninja. So we're seeing a lot of legacy decks here at the top of the standings. Nothing new like Lucario or Sceptile, which did really well in the last couple of weekends. It was, I think, like I said, that rubber band effect, sort of these old decks from previous seasons kind of bouncing back in the forefront of the metagame because a lot of people sort of forgetting about them. And of course, these decks being played by really high level players. And then Frog EX Julie from France was playing also Sleep Altaria. So multiple Bad Dreams Altaria decks in top 4, which is very, very impressive considering the most played Altaria deck or the most played deck of this tournament was Altaria, but it wasn't actually Bad Dreams Altaria. So very interesting results. We'll take a look at that at the end of the video. Zilla91 in 5th place playing Meowscarada. So the highest placing grass deck of the tournament here in 5th place is actually Meowscarada. Not only that, but we had Palmy from Germany, 8-3 in 11th place, also playing Meowscarada. We did have some Sceptiles. Fire Juggernaut from the Philippines was playing Sceptile, as well as Moye from Brazil. So, Sceptile did kind of find its way in multiple, renditions here into top 16, which is pretty cool. Honestly, the standings are very interesting. Like, the different decks and which decks did well this weekend is really, really cool. We have Hassan Latif EX from Indonesia, 6th place. Also Bad Dreams Altaria. And then 7th and 8th place, we have some Lucarios in here. So we have the fighting type Lucario deck with Hitmontop, I believe, from Switzerland, NE, 9-3. That's 7th place. Shout out to him. And then Mr. Tigo, 24 from Puerto Rico in 8th place, also playing Lucario, but playing Bad Dreams Lucario. So like I said, 4 different Bad Dreams decks here with Igglybuff and Darkrai in top 8. But keep in mind, these are decks that really weren't at the forefront of the metagame in terms of the overall standings of the last couple of weekends. And I think, they were, this strategy was just sort of forgotten about a little bit. Definitely not counterplayed or accounted for nearly as much this weekend as maybe it should have. And, the Bad Dream stuff is extremely strong if it's going up against decks that aren't really built or prepared to kind of deal with it to a high degree, right? Certain decks play Ogerpon, certain decks play multiple PCLs or Big Malasada or Comfey and things like that. But, when you hit into matchups where, your opponent isn't really prepared to deal with Sleep, it can easily win because we know how strong of a strategy that Igglybuff Darkrai stuff is. Umbra Architect from Italy, 9th place, just outside of top 8, but did go 10-1. So an incredible record with Altaria and Greninja. This is one of the, I think this was the most popular deck this weekend, and a very, very strong deck, one that I've been very afraid of this entire season. Plays Chingling, plays Lucky Egg, but not the most successful Altaria deck of this weekend, and not even the most successful Greninja deck, as we see Froggy X Fab making it into Final 4. Let's go all the way down here. We have Frog EX GG's. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the name wrong. From Portugal. Shout out to Portugal. Shout out to him. 12th place, also playing Greninja Altaria. And if we go down a little bit, we did see Miss Ping from Argentina playing Blaziken. So Blaziken finding its way into top 16. We had another Lucario here, Captain Capslock from Germany, also playing Fighting Lucario in 15th place. And then sneaking in here, right at the end in 16th place was Moonlight Shuriken VT. Maybe he's from Vermont, who knows? From the United States. Shout out to him playing Giratina Darkrai. And not only that, but Magma the Vice from Germany also playing Giratina Darkrai. So 16th and 17th place, both Giratina Darkrai. And then here we see the only Lightning / Oricorio deck anywhere high up in the standings, at least. And that is 18th place NV Lulu from France. And if we go all the way down here, there was a Flygon deck. This is Imp Prior from France playing Flygon. So Flygon actually had a pretty decent run. I think this was one of the top seeds after day 1, which is pretty cool. 24th place. And there we go. Lots of other cool decks. Some Manetrix down here, a little bit farther down in the standings. Some Suicunes as well. But this Suicune up here, Sergio made it all the way to Grand Finals. A bit of an outlier. I still don't really feel that confident that Suicune's been doing extremely well this season. But, we can't be surprised if it ends up making it to finals in one of these tournaments, right? Considering the only other Suicune in the top of the standings is 38th place, and that is YFRHF from Japan, who I believe topped last week's tournament. or was up there. But anyway, let's take a look at the deck list now. We're 10 minutes in, so I apologize. Let's get into the decks and let's talk about them. So here's the first place deck of the tournament. And it is, of course, Igglybuff, Darkrai, Altaria. Definitely not a bad deck list, but again, I think that like this particular deck didn't have that many people played this weekend. It's still incredibly a strong deck. Like I don't think anybody is going to sit here and say that this isn't a really good deck list. However, it's important to note that I just don't really think the Bad Dream stuff was at the forefront of a lot of people's minds when they were choosing their decks and building their decks for this weekend. This deck also plays a Protective Poncho and Pokemon Center Lady, which I really like. Lycia, one Copycat, double Pokeball, and Professor Research, one Sabrina, one Cyrus, double X Speed as well, which I do think makes sense here for the more consistent Igglybuff lead. But yeah, I just think that it was sort of a definitely an interesting metagame in day 2, one that I think was well positioned for these Bad Dream decks to just consistently do well into a lot of matchups, and I think that's kind of what we saw throughout a lot of the games there in day 2 of the tournament. But yeah, definitely still a strong deck list. I think the win rate, I think this deck had an incredibly high win rate, even though not many people played it. Like every single person that played this deck had a really solid winning record, so I think we'll take a look at that a little bit later. Yeah, how do I feel about Altaria specifically? It's interesting. I think that Altaria is definitely a little bit more of a consistent option than Lucario is. You don't have to play Karina and Arena of Antiquity and whatnot, so you can play a couple other, tech cards in your deck list that aren't really necessarily about like dealing damage. But if the metagame calls for you to one-hit KO Pokemon, Lucario is going to be really strong. But I think that this player and the other players playing Sleep Altaria probably won games because of the sleep functionality of the deck and not so much the Igglybuff or the Altaria, portion of the deck. You know what I mean? But anyway, shout out to SR. That is the first place deck of the tournament this weekend. Sergio, let's take a look at the second place deck this weekend, and it's Suicune Excalibur. There is one PCL in here, Double Giant Cape. We did see that, of course, if you don't draw the one PCL and you can't break out of sleep, you're just going to be in a tough spot. And that's the thing. Like, I do think it is worth it to play one PCL, especially since this deck used to play like one Irida anyway, and PCL is just a little bit more useful, I think, in the current metagame. This is not a deck that's very well built to kind of deal with the Igglybuff keeping Suicune asleep for multiple turns, right? Like, you're not playing Ogerpon, you're not really playing like multiple cards in your deck to deal with sleep. Suicune and Excalibur certainly still a strong deck list. I don't think that many people can necessarily, say that this is a bad deck right now. It hasn't been performing super well this season. But also keep in mind, that first place deck list was playing Protective Poncho, right? So like, maybe kind of a very relevant matchup or very tough matchup for Suicune here in the grand finals playing, Bad Dreams, Altaria, along with, the Protective Poncho. And keep in mind, like even Suicune 140 plus the Giant Capes and whatnot and starting planes, if you take enough sleep damage, like Altaria is going to just be able to one-hit KO you and certainly can one-hit KO Chien-Pao as well. So, I like Suicune, but I do think that its performance this weekend, other than this kind of one outlier position here in grand finals, was definitely a bit of a surprise. Like, I just don't really think, I still don't feel extremely strongly about Suicune, at least in a tournament metagame. I think in ranked, it's probably pretty fine, just because you're probably not going to see a ton of Protective Ponchos and whatnot, or Lightning decks, but it is what it is. Third place, Fab. Let's take a look at his Dark Greninja deck list. I've been waiting for Dark Greninja to really pop off. I still feel like it's a very solid choice in the current metagame. Here he's playing one Inflatable Boat and one Lucky Egg, so kind of a mix here with the the Lucky Egg Jingling strategy. One Field Blower as well, which I do like. This is a deck list that doesn't have anything to protect you from sleep, but keep in mind, Chingling plus Darkrai pings, you're going to be able to kind of just deal enough damage to opposing Igglybuffs. It's kind of okay most of the time if Chingling ends up getting KO'd, you know what I mean? And of course we have Greninja on top of that into the late game. And that's sort of the whole concept of Greninja decks, is that they're really strong in the late game with that extra Greninja damage. I think the Dark Greninja is a really good deck. I think it does suffer a little bit right now in this current season because so many decks are all about, making sure you can kind of 2-hit KO really big mega Pokemon, and this is a deck that can struggle into that particular purpose. But, at the end of the day, Greninja kind of gets around that, right? Being able to kind of hit for the bench Pokemon and maybe target some of the baby Pokemon or, ancillary Pokemon that are not like the big mega Pokemon that are in the active, you know what I mean? But I do like Dark Greninja, one of the more unique decks this season, and it plays Chingling, so of course I do like it. Julie here, fourth place, also playing Bad Dreams. This deck is actually playing one Lucky Egg instead of Poncho, and then also playing Mars in here instead of like a PCL, I believe. So, you know, maybe less good into like the Bad Dreams like mirror matchup. But at the same time, I mean, I actually really like Mars in this deck list because, you know, if the Iggly buffs go down, your opponent, you know, takes 2 points, you can Mars them to 1. You know, hopefully deal your chip damage. Maybe Lucky Egg, of course, draws you some cards, and then you can kind of, you know, win the game outright that way. No extra damage modification is always a bit crazy when you're playing Mega Altaria. But again, like the metagame now isn't really about 1-hit KOing in most decks' eyes. Like it's really about 2-hit KOing and then like hitting a Mega Pokemon. If they retreat, you Cyrus it back up, or, you know, using Sabrina to kind of hit around a Mega Pokemon to KO a bench Pokemon to win the game. You know what I mean? And that's kind of why the Sabrina Cyrus combo is so good in most decks right now. Because, you know, other than Lucario and Charizard, like you're not really 1-hit killing Pokemon to win games. But yeah, I mean, as it turns out, you know, Altaria just did extremely well. And you are hitting for weakness on a lot of those fighting Pokemon. So Altaria inherently should have a pretty winning matchup into Lucario and whatnot. Other than getting 1-hit KO'd, potentially. Zilla here, this is the 5th place deck. This is Meowscarada, and I do love Meowscarada. What I love about Grass right now is that the archetype feels very unique. You know, look at all of these different Grass-type cards that are specific to Grass, but are extremely strong. Quick Growth Extract, you know, Ogerpon, Erica, Leaf Cape, Fragrant Forest. You know, the Grass decks just have a particular like accessory toolkit that makes them really, really strong. And I think it's kind of a win-win situation. Whether you play Meowscarada or Sceptile, they're both really good into the current metagame. One thing about these standings that you got to understand here is that there's just really no Dark-type decks, right? Like at the end of the day, that is the kind of current meta progression, right? Like if you really think about the last couple of seasons, they were really heavily dominated by Hydreigon and other dark type decks. And I know we had Dark Greninja, but that's not necessarily a dark type deck in the traditional sense. You know, Hydreigon literally like nowhere to be found here. I guess Giratina Darkrai is also kind of a dark type deck, but literally, where's Hydreigon? Did anyone even play Hydreigon this weekend? It's absolutely insanity. Like I think the highest placing Hydreigon was 68th place. Never mind, right here. 55th place. Richard Margretti. This is insane. This is like the thing to oh, never mind. Sorry, I missed one right here. Pepet MX. Okay, I did miss like 3 of them. But yeah, it's just crazy to me that I think one of the biggest impacts that anything has happened this season is basically the fighting type decks and their representation in the metagame has been replaced or has replaced those dark type decks, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. I know Altaria and Bad Dreams won this weekend, but Grass type decks won the last couple of weeks. So, you know, Grass is definitely at the forefront of the metagame and it just feels really, really good. The cool thing about Meowscarada is it's a 2-prize archetype. And we do have some of those in the metagame, like Suicune's one of them. Bellybolt used to see play, but there's really less and less of them as the metagame goes on. Even single-prize archetypes aren't really that existent. I guess Magnezone EX does exist now, so you could classify Magnezone or Lucario as a 2-prize archetype. Zoroark was, of course, a new 2-prize archetype in the game. But yeah, Meowscarada is one of those, which I think is really good. I think it's good when the game has a mix between 3-prize, 2-prize, and 1-prize Pokemon that are all like relevant in the metagame. Right now, it does feel like we're kind of missing that single-prize archetype. Which conveniently is a good thing because like the predominant one was Hydreigon in previous seasons, but Magnezone or Lucario should still be relevant, hopefully. But yeah, shout out to Meowscarada, really, really fun deck list. And I think Meowscarada rewards like high skill gameplay. It's like one of the few decks that's like really tricky. Let's kind of skip over Mega here, but shout out to him. It's just the 3rd Sleep Altaria deck. I want to take a look at NE from Switzerland, his deck list playing Fighting Lucario. And this is going to be, yeah, pretty standard, pretty traditional from what we've been seeing at least the last couple of weeks with the Shaman thrown in here, Karina, Antiquity, double Copycat, double Rocky Helmet, so a lot of extra damage, but I really do love double Rocky Helmet, double Hitmontop. It just feels good. Like this could have been a deck that easily ended up winning. Keep in mind, nothing in this deck is protecting you from sleep, so that's certainly a factor for sure. But I certainly really enjoy this version of Lucario, and it still feels to me like a top tier deck this weekend. I mean, the results are important. Like we can't downplay the results of the tournament this weekend, but the results of the tournament are like the standings are really just a byproduct of like the snapshot in time of the decks that people were playing. And I think at the end of this video, when we take a look at the metagame tab, you'll see like what decks saw play this weekend, and that will likely sort of like allow you to interpret the results a little bit differently. You know what I mean? I like to do it at the beginning of the video, but most people just want to see the deck list. So that's why we keep it to the end anyway, but you'll see it in a little bit. Mr. Tigo, this is going to be Bad Dreams Lucario. And yeah, I mean, it's very similar. But again, like the difference between the Igglybuff Darkrai Lucario deck as opposed to Altaria is that Lucario still has to play things like Harina and Arena of Antiquity, whereas the Altaria decks that we saw before, they were able to play like a tool card like Lucky Egg or Poncho, and they were actually playing some mirror match counter cards like Pokemon Center Lady or Mars or something like that. So again, but that's the strategy of Lucario. I honestly don't really know if Bad Dreams Lucario needs to play Karina and Arena of Antiquity, because the extra chip damage that Igglybuff is dealing kind of just allows Lucario to hit for 140 and be fine. I think in the current metagame, like there's not many Pokemon that you can't one-hit KO anyway by just hitting for 190. So the Igglybuff Darkrai stuff, it's nice for certain Pokemon, like maybe stage 2 megas, like that's certainly like where all this extra damage is going to be nice. But I think, things like Poncho and Mars and PCL are probably more useful cards in most matchups. I think most people would maybe agree with that. But theoretically on paper, Lucario being able to hit for that 190 should be good into Altaria and other mega Pokemon. But yeah, I still think Lucario is a really, really strong deck. And I think it's unique. I mean, Charizard really doesn't see any play. So like Lucario is sort of the new deck that like 1-hit KOs Pokemon. I mean, there's just not really other things that are popular in the metagame that do that. So fighting at least has its own identity, which is just dealing a ton of damage. And this is going to be Umbra Architect, 9th place. And this is Greninja Altaria with double Lucky Egg, double Chingling. I think it's basically the exact deck that we kind of have taken a look at over previous weeks. I know it was Sleep Altaria that ended up winning, but this deck to me is still absolutely terrifying and extremely strong. One thing to note though, like if your Chingling does go down to the Bad Dreams like ping damage from Darkrai, the Lucky Egg just sort of won't like proc. Like you won't get the effect of Lucky Egg because you weren't knocked out by damage from an attack, which means that theoretically in the head-to-head, Igglybuff should be a pretty decent counter to Chingling and Lucky Egg. And if those were the most successful decks at the hype in the standings, then maybe Greninja Altaria kind of struggled to do well. But keep in mind, like most decks are just going to KO Chingling with damage other than, Bad Dreams. So it's a pretty concrete, bulletproof strategy other than, when you get KO'd by the Darkrai chip damage, which I guess, Dark Greninja can also do. But anyway, still definitely a really, really strong deck. And then here's Sceptile. So this is going to be Juggernaut. And this is the highest placing Sceptile deck. Kind of an interesting version, by the way. No, this is a really interesting Sceptile deck, and I really like it. We get the Goomies in here to slow the game down, and then we have, no Lucky Egg or no Rare Candy, but we do have double Quick Growth Extract and double Grovyle, as well as Celebi to deal some bench damage with the, the Slicing Snipe attack on Grovyle, which is really cool. So this is definitely a very interesting Sceptile deck, sort of an off-meta, version, one that's definitely not like super standard currently in the metagame, but that's really cool to see. I've talked about it multiple times. One of the biggest things about Sceptile is that you can build around it so many different ways. And this is a really cool example of, a Sceptile deck that is not built like traditionally how we've kind of seen it over the last couple of weekends. No Ogerpon in here as well. Although I would say, especially after this weekend and the results, like you're probably going to want to sneak Ogerpon into your grass decks if you can. But that's a really, really cool list, and I love to see that. Let's take a look at Moye's deck. And this is actually the same Sceptile. So looks like there might be sort of a midweek progression going on here. Maybe this Sceptile deck like won a tournament this week earlier that I missed, and maybe that's why some people are playing this, or maybe these players like collabed. I don't know. I mean, who knows? But perhaps a little bit of net decking going on. But that's really cool to see, though. I really like that Sceptile deck. Let's take a look at Miss Ping. I don't know how to say the name. I just call this person Miss Ping. From Argentina, Blaziken. Blaziken is a deck list. We've talked pretty poorly about Blaziken throughout this season. Its performance hasn't been great. Its win rate hasn't been great. But some people swear by Blaziken, and you know what? It can still win games. No one should be surprised to see like one Blaziken player making top 16 in a tournament, especially if they hit the right matchups. Let's take a look here. All right, didn't really hit many grass. Lost to Sleep, twice. Lost to Altaria 3 times, which is tough. But did beat Lucario twice in top cut. So. I mean, shout out to Miss Ping and Blaziken. Lastly, let's take a look at Moonlight Shuriken's Giratina Darkrai deck, which, I don't know. Are people fans of Giratina Darkrai these days? Like, it's definitely not like a top tier strategy in terms of popularity. But I've always had, an interest in Giratina Darkrai. It's always been, a deck that I'm fond of. Like, I reminisce about Giratina Darkrai. I don't know if I love it. Like, I'm glad it's not a 25% meta share deck anymore. It definitely feels a little bit fair, but another one of those archetypes that is a 2-prize Pokemon archetype, which we just don't necessarily see that often. This is something that we probably don't want to, like, we don't want to really run into Lucario and get one at KO'd. multiple times and then lose, but into a lot of stuff. You know, you got to feel like this is a deck that's somewhat well positioned, especially in maybe something like Altaria. The downside to this, though, is, you know, we're not even playing PCL on this deck. So, like, theoretically speaking, we do just get walled by Bad Dreams, which, you know, if we take a look at the standings here, we actually lost to, oh yeah, that's right. This is a deck that straight up does lose to Altaria Greninja, like, for that particular reason. The thing about Giratina Darkrai is it's a pretty slow deck, and like if the final board state your opponent has is all Mega Altaria and a Greninja, like the game's over, you know what I mean? Because like they're just going to be able to KO and KO. And that's kind of the difficult part about that matchup, and one of the reasons why I think Giratina Darkrai struggled in recent history. But pretty decent performances, beat basically like one of every top deck in the game. Lost to Altaria Greninja twice, but other than that, went 8-0, which is kind of impressive for sure. So I do like Giratina Darkrai. I think it's a really cool choice this weekend. I'm glad that we had at least one make top 16. Pretty cool. Pretty cool to see. All right. Let's wrap up this video by taking a look at the metagame tab, because again, you know, you see these standings, but like, how do these standings happen? You know what I mean? What we like to do at the end of these videos is break down the metagame data, the win rates, the meta shares, the matchup spreads, all that stuff. So let's get into it. If you made it this far in the video, shout out to you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to register for PMPT number 32 this weekend. Anyway, here's the metagame tab. Here's the data. So 10% of the tournament did play Altaria Greninja, which is interesting. It was definitely one of the decks that I recommended most on Friday. Its performance this weekend kind of wasn't that great, I'll be honest. Had a 45% win rate, 99 and 121. I am interested to see what its matchup spread looked like. So struggled into Suicune, also struggled into Lucario, Bad Dreams, and Hydreigon. Yeah, it was also a bit of a struggle into Magnezone. So interestingly enough, like a lot of the decks that were also popular this tournament, this deck didn't do very well into, which is why its average win rate wasn't really that high. But when you take a look at like the standings, there were multiple hype in the standings. So I think in day 2, it probably wasn't even that bad of a choice. But yeah, its win rate definitely suffered. In fact, Altaria Gourgeist also struggled pretty heavily. These were two decks that had some of the highest win rates in previous weekends. So I think as these decks went up in play and the other decks in the metagame went down in play, they actually became like less good options, which is a really interesting example that even though like a certain deck, like let's say a deck has, you know, for an example, let's go down here to like Altaria and Igglybuff. This deck list this weekend, only 9 people played it, but it went 55 and 22. And that's a 70.5% win rate. This is one of the highest we've ever seen out of an individual deck at our tournaments. But keep in mind, if 10% or 15% of the tournament next week plays Altaria Igglybuff, its average win rate will go down pretty tremendously because people are like, it's taking up a bigger portion of the metagame, and the decks that it's good against are taking up a smaller portion of the metagame. You know what I mean? So like, that's the interesting thing about how that can happen. Decks get like kind of too big for their britches almost. Sceptile, the second most played deck, but did very good. 54.5% win rate. Very respectable. And Suicune, in fact, had a really great weekend. Also 6% of the meta share. Still a very diverse metagame. I mean, there's a lot of different decks floating around 5% or above, which is typically a good sign. I mean, the most played deck was only 10% of the meta share, which is crazy. But yeah, all of these Altaria decks, other than Sleep Altaria struggling, Sleep Lucario did do well, though. So, I mean, that just tells me that Bad Dreams was a good call this weekend, and probably not that many people, counterplaying it. Hydreigon, only 4.5% of the meta share, 39 and 58. So Hydreigon suffering massively in this metagame, probably because so many people are playing Suicune, which is crazy. Magnezone didn't have an incredible week, but this is kind of what you would expect from Oricorio and Magnezone, like every week, right? To be about 5% of the meta share and have like a 52% win rate. That's just the standard. Like sometimes it gets, to grand finals. Sometimes it doesn't really place that highly. Not that many people will ever really play Magnezone or Oricorio, but it's always a very respectable deck. A respectable deck, rather. This Sceptile deck with Ogerpon kind of struggled, 47 and 56. And then Zoroark also struggling. So it really just looks like the dark type decks are not well positioned given the current metagame, at least this weekend. And then the Fighting Lucario variants really split. So, I mean, I guess if you combine these two, which you probably should, it would be one of the top 4 most played decks, but it is split on Limitless depending on if you play non-EX Lucario or not. 21 total people playing Fighting Lucario. And again, pretty successful. I mean, what is this, like 82 to 67, which is a really decent win rate, actually. So shout out to them. Manectric actually continuing to do well. So, I mean, Manectric probably deserves to see a bit more play, 52 and 43. This actually made it to did it make it? It made it to grand finals like last weekend, I think. You would expect more people to play Manectric, but You know, maybe people just don't really want to play Lightning right now. I guess there is a decent amount of fighting, but still interesting to see. Blaziken didn't do incredibly poorly, quite frankly. 10 people played it. They went 30-35. So, I mean, you know, I've seen worse. Maybe they farmed a lot of the grass type decks because they were pretty popular. Meowscarada as well, 21-20. So nothing incredible there. Only 8 people played it this weekend. Dark Greninja. So 6 people played Dark Greninja. They went 27-15. So it does look like Dark Greninja was also a really decent meta call. Again, it's interesting to see how some of these decks, when like few people play them, how they kind of fit into the metagame and how well they do. There's another Lucario deck down here that went 13-8. So another fighting Lucario variant that's somehow different than this one, I guess. I don't know how Limitless categorizes these decks. Greninja Lucario went 6-12, so that wasn't a great deck. Flygon. 4 people played Flygon. They went 22-11. I guess, yeah, I mean, oh, okay, it was the Imp team. The Imp team played Flygon, a bunch of good players, so you could probably expect them to do pretty well. And that's a really also a good example is like, if only 4 people play a particular deck, this is Flygon and Sylveon, by the way, you're like you just get a team of like high level players like Brennan and Pryor. Like these are all like really good players on the Imp team. So it kind of skews the data, you know what I mean? When like a small amount of good players are playing a particular archetype. But that's pretty cool to see. Shout out to Flygon and Sylveon and all of those guys. Giratina Darkrai went also 17-6. So again, the 3 people playing Giratina Darkrai did well. But look at how many different decks there are. Their metagame is crazy. This weekend, certainly probably a bit of an outlier in the grand scheme of things, right? Like certain things happen on a given weekend, and you know, it is really just a result of like that snapshot in time. And that's kind of, I think, what we saw this weekend. Bad Dreams, you know, and you got to account for it. You know, if you're not counterplaying, you know, Igglybuff Darkrai and enough people play it, you're probably just going to lose to it. You know what I mean? It's certainly one of those things that I think a lot of people is not super happy about being in the metagame, you know, but it is one of those things that, you know, you can counterplay theoretically. Like there is a way to play around it, at least to some degree. So maybe we just need a little bit more of that in the metagame. But yeah, maybe, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely interesting to see. If Suicune, I just can't expect Suicune to make grand finals again next weekend. And like I said, I think Bad Dreams will likely be counterplayed a little bit more heavily next weekend, but we'll see how it does. You know, other than that, I think the standings do make a ton of sense. I think this was just sort of a bit of an outlier week. People kind of disrespecting and forgetting about Igglybuff Darkrai a little bit too much. And, you know, that's how it happens for sure. But what did you guys think of the standings this weekend? What did you guys think of the metagame and the results? Don't forget to comment down below. Share your opinions. Stay tuned. We'll highlight some more decks on Wednesday, and we'll be back on Friday. Hopefully, we get the set release trailer this week, and we can cover that as well. That's going to be extremely exciting, so I'm really happy about that. It's crazy how quickly the season goes on, but yeah. Anyway, guys, that has been Meta Monday. Don't forget to register for PMPT number 32. Link to register down in the description below. Let's get out of here. Peace out. Have a good one, guys. We'll see you guys next time. And yeah. Bye.